In this Hogwarts Legacy guide, I want to talk about the talents of the game. These are something that you'll get to choose as you make your character throughout the game. There are some good ones, there are some bad ones. I want to give you my recommendations so that you can get off to the best possible start. We'll start with the spell talents first, and the first one is Incendio Mastery. This talent affects the Incendio spell, making you have a AoE fire around you when you cast this spell. This is a very short-range spell, so it's not one that I typically use because I like to range things down from afar. But if you are playing sort of a close-range character and you like this spell, this is a very good one because you tend to use it on packs of enemies because it's kind of a cone, and getting that extra AoE damage will deal more damage to those enemies and also help you hit them all because sometimes you can't always hit them with that cone. Next up, we have Accio Mastery, and this spell is better earlier on in the game rather than later on in the game, and what it does is it pulls all the targets around your target to you. And why it's useful is because sometimes when enemies are close together, it's hard to single out the exact one that you want. Maybe it's got a purple damage shield on it and you're trying to dispel it with Accio, but you can't quite target the right one because they're close together. This will make sure that you get that effect off even if you target the wrong enemy because you'll pull all of them at the same time. But later on in the game when enemies are like kind of resistant to this spell, it's not as useful. And Leviosa Mastery is very similar. It raises everything near your target instead of just the target, and it's useful for the same reason that Accio Mastery is. Sometimes you're trying to single out target to remove the yellow damage shield with Levioso, and you can't hit them because they're grouped together and the targeting is a little wonky, and this allows you to get them by clipping another target with it. But again, later in the game, you don't tend to use Levioso as much, although it is used more than Accio, so of the two, I would recommend this one over that one. Confringo Mastery sends out fiery bolts that seek nearby enemies when you hit a target with Confringo. This is actually really good. I use this spell pretty regularly as when I'm out like fighting enemies on the landscape because it has very good range, has decent damage. A lot of enemies are weak to fire. And the fact that this automatically seeks out other enemies and hits them is fantastic. Highly recommend this one. Depulso Mastery modifies Depulso to send out a blast directly around you, kind of in a cone, knocking everything in front of you backward. Again, this is much better on a close range build, so if you're using something like Incendio and Depulso, these would work really well together because you're going to have to be up close range in order to get the best benefit from this. Defendo Mastery modifies Defendo to make the slice go through the target and then into targets behind it. And it's somewhat useful. It's not all the time that enemies are lined up perfectly to do this, but more often than not, you're trying to keep all the enemies in front of you. So you will be able to get this off more often than you think, and it's not a bad one to pick up. Bombarda Mastery modifies Bombarda and creates an explosive blast where you hit the target. So this is really good if you hit it into a pack of enemies, particularly like undead or something like that. It's a very good modification to the spell. Highly recommend it. Descendo Mastery makes it so when you slam a target to the ground, it creates a shockwave around you that can like knock enemies backwards. It's something like that. I don't really recommend this spell. You're usually using Descendo at range and you're not trying to keep enemies close to you when using this. It could be useful if your spacing is bad, but obviously you're not trying to have bad spacing, so I don't recommend this one. Glacius Mastery is not a bad one. This allows you to, if you freeze an enemy with Glacius and then attack them, it'll kind of explode, shooting shards outward to nearby enemies. Again, anything AoE is really good in this game. Typically, later on in the game, you're fighting lots of enemies at once, and that can make this very useful in that situation. And lastly, Transformation Mastery makes it so that you transform your target instead of like a regular object into an explosive object. So when you fling that object or that enemy that becomes an object at another enemy, they'll explode, dealing extra damage. This one is really, really good in my opinion because exploding things deal tons of damage, and again, they AoE, so it's definitely a good one to pick up. Moving on to the Dark Arts talents, the first one is Stunning Curse. This makes it so that when you use Stupefy on an enemy, it also curses them, increasing the damage they take for a while. This one is really good. It's not hard to get Stupefy off after a little bit of practice, and dealing increased damage to targets after you do this will just make fights go faster, particularly longer, harder fights. Highly recommend this one. Blood Curse is an interesting one because it allows you to deal damage to all cursed targets while you're dealing damage to one cursed target. It really depends on how long your curse duration is. If you have increased curse duration, then that's actually not bad, and also whether you have your spells modified to become curses from taking other talents in this tree. So it's really going to depend on your setup, but if you're kind of going the curse route, this one's not a bad choice to take. Knockback Curse essentially modifies Flipendo in order to provide the curse effect on an enemy when you cast it on them. So if you like this spell and you're using this spell, this is a good one to pick up because it's going to increase the damage you deal to that enemy after using Flipendo. Disarming Curse is pretty much the same effect except when you're using Expelliarmus, so if you like that spell, this is a good one to pick up. Enduring Curse is pretty much a must if you're going the curse route. If you want to use Blood Curse effectively, you're going to need Enduring Curse, and if you modify any of your spells to deal, be curses or several of them, then you absolutely want this one, giving you as much time to deal as much damage as possible. Imperio Mastery effectively makes the target that you've cast Imperio on curse targets that it strikes with its attacks, increasing damage against them. This is a good one to pick up if you plan to kind of be like the Death Eater type mage and go with the unforgivable curses. Slowing Curse is very similar to a couple of the ones just mentioned. It makes Arresto Momentum give the curse effect on enemies, so if you like that spell, definitely pick up this one. Crucio Mastery essentially makes it so if you attack an enemy that you've cast Crucio on, it releases projectiles that curse other nearby enemies. This is a good way to apply Curse over a broad area very, very quickly, and pairs very well with some of the other talents in this tree. And then the Avada Kedavra Mastery obviously makes it so if you're killing an enemy with it, then you kill all cursed enemies. So if you cast Crucio and on enemy, projectiles went out. If you had Crucio Mastery and cursed all these targets, and then you Avada Kedavra something, it would kill them all. It's a really deadly combo if that's the way you want to play. And then last but not least, you have Curse Sapper. This makes it so when you kill cursed enemies, you restore health. So if you have this one and you did that exact scenario, you would heal yourself for each one of those enemies you killed. So next up, let's take a look at Spell Knowledge 1 and 2. These effectively give you more bars that you can slot spells on that you can kind of switch between. Highly recommend at least getting 1 or 2 of these because otherwise you're going to keep swapping spells all the time and it can get frustrating. You can have yourself like a fighting setup on your main bar and then maybe like an exploration on another bar, or you know what I mean? You can have your exploration on your main bar and your fighting setup on a backup bar. That way you can just swap bars when you get into combat and then swap when you want to get back to exploration, so you're not constantly having to juggle spells back and forth on one bar. Wiggenweld Potency 1 and Wiggenweld Potency 2 are really good because healing potions really don't heal you for that much health. Getting the most out of them would be taking the 2 talents for both of these because then you'll actually be able to heal for a significant amount with each potion, and you don't have a ton of potions and it can be kind of a pain in the butt to go make potions sometimes. So it's better to get the most out of them and not have to just keep chugging potions because they barely heal you, so I highly recommend both of these. Swift is an interesting one. I don't think you really need it if you're good at dodging, but again, if you're trying to play a build that's like close range spells like Incendio or Repulso, this is a good one to have because it allows you to get close to enemies very quickly, allowing you to hit them with those spells more easily. Protego Absorption is a great talent because it essentially allows you to, when you block enemies with Protego, it builds your Ancient Magic meter, and there are a lot of enemies in this game that have such high health pools. The most effective way to deal damage to them, or one of the most effective ways, is through using Ancient Magic, and it can take a long time to build it up if you don't have things like this, so I highly recommend taking anything, essentially, that helps build your Ancient Magic meter faster, because it'll make those fights easier. Ancient Magic Throw Expertise allows you to grab enemy weapons that you've disarmed and throw them back them, so if you're using Expelliarmus, if this is a spell that you like, this would be a good one to take, because it'll allow you to take their wand after you take it out of their hand, or whatever weapon, it's like an axe or something, and fling it back at them for additional damage. Basic Cast Mastery is pretty much a staple, I think, for any mage. It reduces the spell cooldown of your spells just from basic attacking. This is really helpful because this gets your spells back quicker, allowing you to cast them more often. Stupefy Mastery essentially makes it so when you stupefy enemies, they remain stunned longer after you stupefy them. I don't think this is super necessary. Most enemies, particularly later on in the game, you don't necessarily want to stupefy them. Sometimes you do it just out of habit, but there are better ways to deal damage to them than stupefying them, so I don't recommend taking this one. Evasion Absorption allows it so that when you successfully dodge an enemy attack, you gain some of your Ancient Magic meter. Again, as I was saying, anything that builds your Ancient Magic meter faster is good, so definitely take this one. Protego Expertise essentially makes it when you pull off a perfect Protego, which is like when you block at the very last second, it'll send 2 projectiles back at enemies, dealing damage to them. If you're good at timing your blocks, or parries in this case, I highly recommend getting this one, but if you're not, then don't worry about it. Revelio Mastery just increases the range of Revelio. You use this all the time in the game. I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary because usually you know when to use Revelio, and as you go further into the game, you become less reliant on it and know what to look for. But if you just want a generally easier gameplay experience, it's not a bad one to pick up. And Basic Cast Airborne Absorption makes it so that when you like Levioso an enemy or knock an enemy up into the air and then you hit him with basic attacks, that it increases more of your Ancient Magic meter. Highly recommend this one. You do this all the time when you're fighting, even when you're not even trying to do it, you do this. So get this one to help build your Ancient Magic meter faster. Protego Mastery, it makes it so that you release a damaging blast that breaks enemy shields when you do a perfect Protego. Again, this is when you like parry at the very last second or block at the very last second with Protego. If you're not very good at this, I wouldn't recommend doing it, but if you get it down and you find that you're doing it pretty much perfectly all the time, highly recommend this one. Stupefy Expertise is not a bad one to pick up because I use Stupefy all the time. I'm not a perfect Protego expert, but I often get off Stupefies, and this is a good way to increase some damage you do when doing Stupefy, so it's not a bad one to take. Moving along to the stealth talents, you have Sense of Secrecy 1 and Sense of Secrecy 2. These essentially make it harder for enemies to see you. Stealth is extremely deadly in this game. You can clear entire camps Assassin's Creed style without anyone ever seeing you, without ever having to fire a shot. The downside to that is that, you don't get dueling challenges as often. Like you'd miss out on those because you're just killing things with stealth. But once you have those unlocked, it's not super important. But it's a great way to alleviate some of the difficulty of this game, like in terms of combat, or sometimes the somewhat tedious nature of like how long fights can take with the number of enemies. You can absolutely bypass a lot of the difficulty just by using stealth. So if you're someone who likes to use stealth, you find it easy for you to use, absolutely get these. And Human Demiguise is really good if you are also someone playing stealth a lot. This allows you to move faster or sprint while you're using Disillusionment. You use this not only in combat, but also like when you're going around the castle and areas you're not supposed to be, restricted areas, to move faster. So it's a good one to take just generally. And lastly, Petrificus Totalis Mastery makes it so that when you use your stealth attack on an enemy, it'll also AoE. A lot of times enemies are together, so this is really, really useful because maybe you'll walk up and get one, but then the other one will see you because you're right next to it. But if you have this, you'll just get them both, and then you don't have to worry about it. Makes stealth encounters much more easy, and if you're going to play like a stealthy character, definitely take this one. And lastly, we come to the Room of Requirement talents. The first one is Eterus Potion Potency. This makes you invulnerable and deflect projectile attacks back at enemies when you're using this potion. This is really strong in my opinion. If you have Eterus Potion and you're using it, this makes you like invincible. So I don't know why you wouldn't take this one if you are someone who likes to use potions. And this might even make you use this potion just because this is a very strong effect. The Invincibility Potion Potency makes invincibility potions last longer. They have a very short duration by default, so if you want to use invisibility potions at all in this game, ever, definitely take this talent. The Fertilizer talent makes it if you're using the Chinese Chomping Cabbage tool in the game, which can deal damage to enemies. If you're using that, it'll make it so that you summon 2 instead of 1 for each one you throw out. Basically doubles its efficacy, so if you're someone who's using that, this is a no-brainer. Absolutely take this one. If you're not, then don't worry about it. The Headache talent makes the damage and duration of incapacitated effects from mandrakes increased. Again, if you're someone who likes to use mandrakes in combat as your tool, it can be very deadly against a wide range of enemies because of the AoE that it does. But if you don't have this, it's not going to be nearly as effective. So if you're going to use mandrakes, take this. If you're not, then don't. The Maxima Potion Potency makes it so that your attacks have additional increased damage and break enemy shields when attacking. This can make you particularly deadly in combat if you're using Maxima Potions. So if you're somebody who's using potions a lot in this game, this is a good one to pick up. Thunderbrew Potency increases the range and damage of the Thunderbrew Potion. This potion basically stuns enemies that are near you and deals damage to them. This increases how far out it'll hit them and increases the damage it does. This is really good. If you're going to use this potion, highly recommend getting this one because that can make that potion really, really deadly. The Focus Potion Potency increases the duration of this potion's effect. This reduces the cooldown of your spells, so your cooldown will remain lower for a longer period of time. So if you're somebody who likes to fling a lot of spells a lot, or if you're at a part of the game where you're having like a lot of combat, this is really good. And lastly, you have Noxious. This makes the Venomous Tentacula attacks deal more damage and break shields. The fact that this can break shields is really strong, in my opinion, because that'll allow you to deal damage to enemies. A lot of times, if your spells are on cooldown, you can't damage a particular enemy because of their shield. This can go a long way to alleviating that problem if you're using this tool. So that sort of wraps up our video on talents. I hope you found some useful information here. You do have quite a bit of talent points in this game, but there are some that are much better than others, and ones I've recommended here that you take that I think will make things a lot easier for you. If you have further questions about talents, please leave them in the comments below. What do you guys think of the talent system in this game so far? Which talents are you really enjoying using? Are you enjoying the game? Let me know in the comments below.